In today's video, we're going to explore how to use a light meter. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just getting started, a light meter can make a huge difference. While our camera's meter is just fine, an external light meter like these that I have here are going to be much better for getting an accurate reading. While you can use them for natural light portrait photography, architectural photography, and also landscape photography, this video today is going to focus primarily on using a light meter with flash. Sometimes you'll hear people interchange the terms light meter and flash meter. There are some light meters that don't measure flash, so those are just called exposure meters. There are in general, though, three types of light meters. There are incident light meters. Those read the amount of light that's falling and hitting the meter. If you hold that next to your subject and measure the light, it will tell you how much light is falling on your subject. There are then reflective light meters, and those will read the amount of light that is reflecting off of an object, but those can be skewed, or the results can be skewed due to the color of the object or the reflectivity of it. Then there are spot meters, which are simply just reflective light meters that measure a very small area, and these are very commonly used in landscape photography, and they can be used to get more accurate readings of distant subjects. But we're going to focus on flash meters and primarily incident light meters. Most meters that I've come across that measure flash, they also measure, they are incident light meters. When we are outside, our light meter will tell us how bright the sun is, and that's going to influence how we change our camera settings in order to get a proper exposure. When we're in a studio environment, things are quite different. The light meter doesn't really tell us what to do. It just helps us set up our flashes so that we can get a proper exposure. What you're going to do primarily is measure and see how bright a light is right now, and you're going to adjust it or lower it until you get the amount of brightness that you're looking for. That in general is how light meters work, and that's how you'll see me using them on set in my videos or videos of me shooting most of the time. The light meter is going to provide me with a starting point, and then I'm going to make adjustments after I've seen the images on screen to make sure that I get exactly what I'm looking for. Now, why would you use a light meter? Well, in general, it's going to improve your accuracy. This is going to be very important in commercial photography, for instance, where maybe you'll be hired to photograph headshots of an entire company in different offices, and you'll want those headshots to look exactly the same. A light meter is great for that. In general, though, whether or not you're a commercial photographer doesn't really matter. The light meter is just going to help you get closer to the exposure that you're looking for and get things dialed in a lot quicker than if you used trial and error. Now, you could still use trial and error. That's fine, but the light meter or a light meter is just going to help you get things dialed in a lot quicker and get your job done faster and more accurately. There are several different brands of light meters that you can choose from, but for the most part, you're probably going to end up with a brand called Sekonic. Now, I am an ambassador for Sekonic, but don't think that they're paying me to make this video today. I'm just making it because I want to share with you about light meters so that you can use them in your work. If you go onto Adorama's site and you search for light meters, the 9 most popular results are going to be made by Sekonic, just for example. So that's why they're such a big force in things. So I have this one here. It's an L308. I used this light meter from the 90s until the late 2010s. And it's great. The way that it works is you can tell it to meter flash or ambient. You can tell it to measure flash when you push the button on the side, and then when it sees a flash, it will measure it. The meter that I got to replace this was the L478. And that meter was made specifically for the Elinchrom lighting system. So, well, the meter that I had was made specifically for the Elinchrom lighting system because it had a radio transmitter in it that spoke to the Elinchrom Skyport system, and that was great. They also make the same meter for Photics. Then I switched from the 478 to the 858, and that's this light meter right here. They make this light meter with a radio transmitter module that's right here in the back, and you can get it for different brands. So mine works with the Elinchrom lights that I use. They also make them for Broncolor, Godox, Photics. These are great because When you're using the L308, what you would have to do is you would tell the flash, or you would tell the meter to look for a flash. You would use the trigger from your camera to fire the flash, and then the meter would tell you how bright it is. With these radio units, the way that they're going to work is that you're going to tell it to be on the same frequency as your lights. You're going to set your lights up into different groups, and you're going to tell the meter that I want to fire group 1, which is usually my main light. It's going to fire group 1 and measure it all on its own. And you don't have to walk around with a meter in one hand and a trigger on the other, which is what I had to do for the 20 or so years that I used this L308. So if you have one of those brands, I would definitely suggest getting a 478 that matches your brand or an 858 that matches your brand. In addition to all the things that the 478 does, the 858 also meters flash duration, and it can meter high-speed sync, and it has a built-in spot meter. So it has all the bells and whistles. So I want to give you a practical example of how to use the light meter on set. I've got my Sekonic 858. This one has the radio transmitter in it for the Elinchrom system, and I'm using my Elinchrom lights. So I'm doing a 3-light setup today. So I've got my beauty dish up here, and that's my main light. I've got a softbox down here, and that's my fill light. And I've got a strip softbox up here, and that's my hair light. And I've got my trusty model Sia over here, who probably needs her hair brushed. But we're going to work on this anyway today. So when I use my lights and I use this transmitter, well, whenever I use my lights, I'm always using the light meter. I've always got my main light in group 1. So when I set up my main light, I switch it over to group 1. And that way I never have to think about it. So that when I go on the trigger to adjust the power of the light, or when I go on the light meter to meter it and adjust the power of the light, and more on that in just a second, I'm going to go to group 1, and it's going to be in group 1, and it's going to work. When I set up my fill light, I always put it in group 2. And when I set up my background lights, they're in group 2. When I set up my edge lights, they're in group 3, but we're not using one. And when I set up my hair light, it's going to be in group 4. And that's the way it's going to be every single time. So now I'm going to measure the lights for you, and we're going to see how bright my main light is. And we're going to measure that independently of the others. So I've got my shutter speed. It's going to be 1/200th of a second because that's the sync speed on my camera. We're using regular flash. We're not using high-speed sync or anything fancy like that. I'm going to turn the meter over to group 1, and I'm going to measure the main light. Okay, so it meters at f8 and 8/10. But I want to shoot at f8. I want to shoot at 100 ISO f8 at 1/200th of a second. Right now, the meter says that if I took a photo correctly exposed, I would need to put it at f8 and 8/10, which is around f10 in the camera. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press the power down buttons here. There's some plus or minus buttons in the meter, and those adjust the power up and down respectively. I'm going to press the minus button 8 times because that is going to turn the light down 8/10. And that's something that I don't think I talked about, was that with this trigger, I can turn the power of the lights up and down for each group or all together. And that's what makes using it so nice. Now I've got to meter it again and make sure that it works. Okay, great. So it metered right now at f8. So that's fine. Now, if I want to meter the fill light, that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to go to group 2. I'm going to meter it with the meter pointed at the light. And it meters actually at f4. And that's where I want it. Typically what I do is I have my fill light 2 stops darker than my main light. When I say that the meter meters at f4, what that means is I would have to set my camera to f4 to get a proper exposure with this flash right now if I'm using this flash just by itself. But I don't want to do that. I just want this flash to fill in my shadows a little bit. And that's why I have it metering at f4. And that's where I have it almost all the time, about 2 stops down. So it's just a starting point. All these measurements are just a starting point, and then we're going to go from there. Now my hair light, I usually also have that 2 stops down. So I want to meter it, and I want it to be at f4. Now right now it's metering at 4 and 8/10. So I'm going to push the minus button 8 times again. Great. I'm going to take a meter reading, and we're going to go from there. This light is just adding a little bit of light on top of her head that's going to preserve detail and possibly separate her from the background. If she had shoulders and a darker shirt, you might see an outline there, but we're really just preserving details and adding a little bit of separation. If we had a person with really dark hair, we might turn it up. So you might be wondering, if this light meter is at f8 and this light meter is at f4, if I combine them together, won't she be overexposed because I'm shooting at f8? Well, this light is 4 stops brighter than this light, four times brighter than this light. So that means that when I combine the two of them together, I'm just adding a little bit of light. It's not a lot where they overlap. In fact, if I meter it, it just meters at f8 and 1/10. That's all that happens. So yes, it is slightly brighter, but it doesn't really matter overall. Now, what if I didn't have this radio system? Well, I would turn the dome inwards. And then what I would do is I would just measure one light at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to measure this one. And it actually meters at f8 and 1/3. I think that's because some other lights are getting in there. I'm going to make a little tunnel and meter again. This way, the hair light or the fill light won't make a difference. It meters at f8. That's great. I'm going to meter my fill light again. I'm going to meter it. Meters at f4. I'm going to meter my hair light. Meters at f4. So that's how I'm going to use it. The dome is in. My hand's cupped over it. It's going to meter one light at a time. The other thing that you might be wondering, why do I have it so close to her face when I'm metering? Well, it's something called the inverse square law. When light comes out of our modifiers, it falls off rapidly. And if I measure the light far away from her face, I'm going to get an inaccurate measurement. As you can see from our test frame with all of the lights firing, it looks pretty good. If we needed to now, I would go into the individual groups and change the lights accordingly so that I got the look that I was going for. But using the light meter got us very close, if not all the way there. And that's the great thing about having a meter. It just speeds up our workflow and makes our life easier. Now, some photographers will say that you don't need a meter, that you can just look at your camera screen or you can look at your computer screen. And this can kind of work, but what if you're in different lighting conditions? Then you may not have an accurate grasp of what's being displayed on your screen. Or maybe your screen needs calibrated and you're not getting an accurate vision of your images on there. Or let's say some people have even argued that you can just use the RGB numbers and look at the right 255 values for a particular color or shade or skin tone on your monitor and do things that way. That sounds really complicated. And using a light meter is so simple. I'm just going to point it at the light. I'm going to measure the light. It's going to tell me how bright the light is. I'm going to adjust the light up or down, and I'm going to get a far more accurate exposure. In general, of course, I'm always going to use the light meter to get myself into the ballpark, and then I'm going to take test photos, a few test photos, and just dial the light in more accurately. Now, if you don't have a meter, you can just shoot a series of test photos. It's fine. It's just that having the light meter is going to help you get more consistent results in general and just speed up your workflow overall. I hope this video helped and made sense. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those below. And as always, I hope that you have a wonderful day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and sign up for the bell, and I will talk to you soon.